The cop that pulled Kwame Ture over that night, was it Landers?
How'd you know?
I could smell him a mile away now.
What, do you got smell-o-vision?
He's been a bad cop for a long time.
Yeah?
Yeah. A few years ago, he shot and killed a black kid.
Jesus.
He said he had a gun, but he wasn't that type.
Why do you guys tolerate this?
You want to be the guy that rats him out? You want to go to Lander's office now? 'Cause we're a family.
Right or wrong, we stick together.
That reminds me of another group.
If you were someone sitting through 2018's BLACKkKLANSMAN when it first released, chances are you witnessed several strong audience reactions. The film, marked an absurdist comedy based on true events, orchestrates several whimsical scenes and laugh-out-loud gags to entertain its viewers for the majority of its runtime. What you probably wouldn't have heard, however, were any chuckles once the film's credits rolled on screen. In fact, if you were sitting in the cinema like I was when it came to a close, you'd have been hard-pressed to have heard anyone say anything at all. The last few weeks have been emotional, to say the least, a sentiment I'm sure is shared by many people around the world. The unjust murder of George Floyd, a 46-year-old African-American murdered at the hands of Derek Chauvin, a Minneapolis police officer, after repeatedly crying, "I can't breathe," has inspired a global, far-reaching civil rights movement, bringing to light the kinds of police brutality and institutionalized racial inequality that we have all allowed to exist for far too long. George Floyd isn't the only person with a role to play in this seemingly never-ending story. Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery are just some of the names you'll hear similar events having happened to recently. But this is kind of the way things go, right? An innocent black person is arrested, brutalized, or killed by cops. We say our words, condemn the actions of both those that made it happen or allowed it to happen, maybe post something on social media to tell everyone that we agree this was bad. And then, bizarrely, a lot of us move on, ready to repeat the cycle the next time it inevitably happens again. That is at least the story if you're a white person, especially if you are, like me, a white man. And while I was raised a Jewish one living in England, and so have some experience in being on the receiving end of anti-Semitism and certain prejudices, these are not visible differences that I have. I can hide this aspect of myself if I want, and I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't chosen to in the past. Now, I don't still practice Judaism. In fact, concerning theology, I'd probably consider myself something of an atheist. But yes, on some fundamental level, I do still consider myself Jewish. It's a part of my cultural heritage. I'm proud to have performed a bar mitzvah at 13. It connects me to my family lineage. I've met lifelong friends through my involvement. It does kind of feel like something in my blood that can't be taken away. But again, it's invisible. So when people do eventually learn this fact about me, it is always something that has to be revealed, like a shocking taboo, and it is always immediately followed up with a comment on my appearance, whether I do or don't look Jewish. Growing up, it always meant an assuming comment about my downstairs area, and I will never forgive Meet the Fockers for creating this damagingly false image of Jews in the minds of an entire generation. While that film has sort of faded into obscurity in more recent years, today I do still see something in people's eyes when they learn this about me. It feels like there's this instant hesitance, and the interrogation begins on just how Jewish are you, as though they're weighing up the pros and cons before deciding whether or not to get too close. Some are just curious and want to know more, but the struggle is always the same. You are being treated differently, and that feels alienating. It's the kind of response that encourages people not to want to divulge the information in the first place, and has gone on to have a seriously negative effect on my mental health in the past, that sometimes I just think, thank God, again, atheist so not really, you can't see it, that my appearance doesn't give it away. I do not have to worry about being treated differently when I walk out my front door by those that don't know me. But what if it were visible? How would I feel then if I couldn't hide that? People of colour do not have the same luxury that I do. Their differences are out in the open whether they like that or not, subject to everyone's own prejudices. And while I've always considered myself vocal in my personal life when bearing witness to systemic sexism, homophobia and racism, particularly in the workplace, I am quickly realising that I do not speak up about these things publicly nearly enough. The ability for me to do this, to question but not challenge, to say my piece and then go back to what I was doing, to forget, is the definition of white privilege. I do not live in a society where this stuff has to bother me, and my silence, in turn, continues to enable the oppression of those it does. The ability for us to say, I don't see race, and kind of take this supposed neutral stance, actively removing ourselves from the conversation, is another part of this white privilege. We may not, quote, see race, but that's easy for us to say. Our governments, our police forces, our employers do not oppress us for being white. We have no idea what it's like to be refused opportunities, to be attacked for our skin colour, or denied our basic human rights. And the power and influence that gives us as a majority holds us accountable when we don't speak up. It bears a greater responsibility to continue this fight for human rights across all races, in spite of our own comfort. As a child, the experience of anti-Semitism and racism went hand in hand. I gave in to provocation, which led to a valuable lesson that still lives with me to this day. A moment of deep learning that continues to inform my thinking and behaviour now. But what these current events have made me realise is that, despite putting a lot of that behind me, there is still a lot more work to be done. It is not enough to simply be not racist. We must be anti-racist. So when deciding what the next video would be, I couldn't help but ask myself, how can I translate this global feeling into a discussion on film art? You could argue maybe it doesn't need one. But what I ultimately decided was that it's more relevant now than ever to be discussing art that motivates a conversation based on perspectives from those in minorities. In today's case, filmmaker Spike Lee. The story of BLACKkKLANSMAN, directed by Lee, follows real-life African-American police detective Ron Stallworth, played by John David Washington, who leads an investigation into the Ku Klux Klan in 1972. To infiltrate the organization, he creates a white racist persona on the phone and enlists the help of Adam Driver's Flip Zimmerman, a Jewish detective, to pose as the face of the man they've been speaking with. As a viewer, it's hard not to be moved in some way by the paradox of a black man posing as a Jewish man posing as a KKK member.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude. What?
Throughout the film, both Ron and Flip wrestle with their own cultural identities in the face of such hatred. At the start, neither seem particularly fazed by how they view themselves ethnically, and through the story are forced to ask difficult questions regarding those details with what the investigation requires. How they speak, how they look. Whole scenes are dedicated to how transparently one character could realistically morph into the other, despite their visible and audible differences.
We can't quit till we get our share.
Brother, we can't quit till we get our share. Doesn't make grammatical sense, but okay.
Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Say it for OJ, Jimmy. You too. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. That's right. There it is.
Ron plans to peacefully dismantle systemic racism from the inside, somewhat naive to the abuse that awaits him in his own office space, but finds himself more and more emotionally motivated like the radical activists he distances himself from, while Flip, on the other hand, doesn't much identify as Jewish at all, despite being born one.
Who's that Jewish necklace around your neck?
Jimmy, it's not a Jewish necklace, it's a Star of David. Okay.
Flip, you're Jewish?
I don't know, am I?
As Ron becomes more and more fueled by the investigation, Flip finds himself in increasingly more dangerous situations, and struggles to sympathize with Ron's insistence to keep the case going.
That's my problem. For you, it's a crusade. For me, it's a job. It's not personal, nor should it be.
Why haven't you bought into this?
Why should I?
Because you're Jewish, brother. The so-called chosen people. You've been passing for a WASP. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, cherry pie hot dog white boy. That's what some light-skinned black folks do. They pass for white.
By the time the investigation has gone on long enough for the two to receive their KKK membership card, Flip takes a good long look at himself.
I'm Jewish, yes, but I wasn't raised to be. It wasn't part of my life. I never thought much about being Jewish. Nobody around me was Jewish. You know, I wasn't going to a bunch of bar mitzvahs. I didn't have a bar mitzvah. I was just another white kid. And now I'm in some basement denying it out loud. I never thought much about it. Now I'm thinking about it all the time. About rituals and heritage. Is that passing? Well, then I have been passing.
While many interpret this scene as the character accepting his heritage, The payoff in dialogue of the term passing, used earlier to describe someone disguising their ethnicity to be treated like everyone else, infers also a lesson in accountability. It's hard not to interpret a line like this, said by an introspective white Jew holding a KKK membership card, as him questioning his privilege, and realizing that his ability to stay silent and not act may just be part of the problem. By the time the narrative finds its natural conclusion, Ron, Flip and friends appear to have successfully achieved their goals. A planned bombing by the KKK goes awry, David Duke, the head of the group, is made a fool of, and generally, justice seems to prevail. Our heroes even have time to successfully arrest their colleague for racial profiling and assault. Shortly afterwards, however, the chief of police demands they cut the investigation short, severing all ties to the Ku Klux Klan and destroying all the evidence. Despite the change they could have effected, their success is limited. David Duke is left free to continue turning his cult into a more dangerous political organization, and the case is publicly kept under wraps by a, still, systemically racist institution. In the final scene, Ron and his girlfriend Patrice acknowledge the uphill battle they face individually moving forward, before an ominous knock is heard at the front door. Immediately, the two bear firearms. As they gradually approach a small window, something unorthodox starts to happen. We see imagery of Klansmen burning a cross, before news footage from real life takes over, showing brutal, unthinkable acts of racism from an America that has lost its values and continues on the decline, lost to a time of corruption and white supremacy operating from the shadows. And if you saw this in cinemas with a predominantly white audience, there's a big reason all the laughter and applause that preceded its finale got replaced by a stunned, uncomfortable silence. While other films may suggest at real-world issues through inference and theatricality, keeping its audience amused in the comfort and safety of its fictionalization, Lee dispenses with the handcrafted framing that has composed his story thus far and takes us into the very world we live in, unfiltered, hard to watch, and inescapable. Most likely because, from a black perspective, that's exactly what it is. This stuff is not so much inferred in everyday life as it is blatantly apparent. The dolly shot is a staple of Lee's work, and here it is done with purpose beyond simply serving as a stylistic stamp. Having the set behind our characters moving contrary to their stillness creates an effect similar to the opening shot of The Graduate. In The Graduate, the technique was to externalize this sense of directionless, moving in space but not really going anywhere at the same time. In BLACKkKLANSMAN, the intention feels quite similar, moving forward and yet stuck in the same position black people have been in for far too long. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the characters have their guns pointed at the fourth wall. If the idea is that the more they continue forward, the closer to our world they get, the kind that continues to discriminate and threaten their very lives, who can blame them for not wanting to lower their guns, for being on the defensive, for peering over their shoulders, for always being on the lookout? In doing this, the film achieves an effective tone shift. You've spent some 2 hours laughing at the absurdity of this story, as though enough time has passed that we can look back on this form of hatred in disbelief. It has this disarmingly chuckle-worthy quality. How could people possibly have tolerated this, we ask, only to quickly realize that we do. Things have not changed that much, and in real life, that fear and hatred are in many ways the same today as they were then. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I too have been part of the problem, and that despite my outspokenness the last few weeks, if you've been following me on social media, that doesn't excuse my prior silence. I could have been publicly speaking up more about racism a lot sooner, and I can only apologize for taking this long to answer that call. This is a learning curve for everyone, some may learn it sooner than others, but I hear you and that's something I will work to change moving forward. And if you are one of those people who will only speak up on racism in the form of a black square with a hashtag, simply because everyone else is doing it, and are still on the fence as to whether you really want to take the plunge and engage in what is irrefutably an uncomfortable conversation, either online or in your personal life, the kind that might even alienate your friends and family, I hope you will understand and consider that, no matter how well-intentioned the silence may be, it alone is a non-action. And the sooner we acknowledge this, the sooner we can begin to affect real change that comes from educating ourselves, doing the research, sharing the information, going to the protest, signing the petitions, donating money to the right causes, engaging in the conversation, and showing people the hard-to-watch video evidence that you won't find through televised broadcasters with their own agendas. If you're not too sure how to proceed, there are several links in the description, along with a list of reading materials, petitions, and educative media to help you get started. The day we all put in the work to collectively change our complicit behaviour may just be the same day audience reaction to BLACKkKLANSMAN's final moments goes from an awkward, uncomfortable silence to a vocal championing applause that tells everyone Black lives do matter. Thanks for watching.